And so I ended up seeing this little ad for a startup, which at that time was called Better Caring. It's now called Mabel. I thrive in environments of restriction and scarce resources.
Yeah.
And when things get too comfortable, I find it's not challenging enough. For most startups, that doesn't involve lives being lost. So, it's less pressure. But it is, I discovered it was the same skill set, which was a pleasant surprise. They are entirely preventable deaths. And so it was working with the local health system and our team to implement and get communities to implement the types of prevention measures that would be needed. So for the failures and the types of failures and the impact of the failures in those two different parts are really different. So the children are either sleeping under bed nets or they're not. They've either got malaria or they don't. It's a really defined outcome. I actually originally studied neuroscience, nothing to do with anything I do today. But I very quickly worked out that I'm not very good in a lab environment. We had tried so hard to get someone because 95% of the industry is female. That type of arrangement is actually better without many investors involved who are focused mostly on profits.
Quick shout out to all startup founders. This message is just for you. Now, talking to other founders was by far the best way I found to learn and solve problems. Our startup founder groups bring together 8 to 10 founders to tackle challenges, solve problems, and get valuable feedback from peers who understand the startup grind. Visit failwisdom.com and click on Startup Founder Groups to learn more and to join us. Today I'm excited to have, actually before I start, is it Piroska Bisits-Bullen? Is that pronounced?
Piroska Bisits-Bullen. Make the S like an SH.
Piroska Bisits-Bullen. My last one was Jan Golublensky. Piroska. Okay, Piroska. Yeah. Piroska. Today I'm excited to have Piroska Bisits-Bullen with us. Piroska is a dynamic leader in the social enterprise space, known for her expertise in... I've got something in the way of my... I'll just start again, sorry.
Go for it, go for it.
Today I'm really excited. Today I'm really... you often see guests laughing at the beginning, and this is why I always stuff up the beginning. It's unbelievable. Okay. Today I'm excited to have Dr. Piroska Bisits-Bullen with us. Piroska is a dynamic leader in the social enterprise space, known for her expertise in growing financially sustainable ventures that make a positive impact on the world. With a background in data and technology, Piroska has co-founded and scaled enterprises across healthcare, education, and climate change sectors. Her journey includes working on critical health programs in Cambodia and Malawi, serving as a director of multiple social enterprises, and earning accolades for her innovative approaches. Welcome to the podcast, Piroska.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you. So let's just get straight into it. That's a bit of a background on you, but tell us about yourself and what inspired you to start working in the social enterprise space.
Well, it's been quite a journey. I actually originally studied neuroscience, nothing to do with anything I do today. Yeah. But I very quickly worked out that I'm not very good in a lab environment.
Right.
Conceptually, neuroscience is really fascinating, but the practical day-to-day is quite routine, quite mundane. And also, I'm not a very coordinated person, and trying to pipette tiny little things into tiny little flasks was just not my thing.
Right.
So that was my first fail in life,
I guess
realizing that I'm actually terrible at lab work.
I guess labs would also would they be like mainly sort of dark rooms and no light and that sort of thing?
It depends what type of lab. Okay. Some of them are very bright lights, but they're very stark. They're stark environments. Yeah. You're doing very routine work. I was working on genetically modified E. coli in a neuropharmacology lab, and I had to test 900 different ways of getting this protein out of these E. coli, right. And none of them worked. And you're
900
testing and
ways.
testing and testing, and that's just a small project.
Right.
And so you're working on things that are potentially life-changing in the long term, but your day-to-day is extremely routine.
But you should have done 300 more, because didn't it take Edison 1,200 times to, get it right?
Exactly. And at that point, I realized I am the type of person, I need to have a more immediate, tangible effect on things. And I have great respect for all the people that work in research. I just unfortunately wasn't able to do it myself very well. So then I ended up working in international public health, and that has a really immediate, tangible benefit on the world, which was very motivating for me. I worked on public health programs in a number of different countries. I ended up living in Cambodia and Malawi for a few years each. Cambodia, I was working on a program that was funded by the United Nations, by UN Women. And in Malawi, I was working on a children's health program. And there you do see really tangible differences day to day. And you can measure your impact fairly well. So I did that for about a decade. And I took my husband along with me as the trailing spouse. So in Malawi, the only reason, well, I would have happily stayed in Malawi running programs there. It was actually the highlight of my career has been running those programs and training a Malawian team to take over, who are absolutely fantastic and are still running it today.
Wow.
But we were living without electricity, without hot running water, no fridge, no microwave. My husband was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to work on Australian time.
All right.
We had no electricity, but we had internet.
Oh, you did have internet.
Yes.
No electricity and internet. Wow.
Yeah, it was a really interesting combination. So eventually he just got tired of showering in a bucket and getting up at 4 a.m., which is very, very reasonable and totally appropriate reaction to the situation. So we moved back to Australia, and of course the HIV rate here is much lower. There's no malaria. Typhoid is not a common occurrence.
Yeah.
My skill sets doesn't seem to be very relevant. And
well, it's sort of fortunate in a way for us, isn't it? Like,
look, it was fortunate in the end. My skill set was not very relevant, and it's fortunate for Australia that it wasn't very relevant. And so I ended up seeing this little ad for a startup, which at that time was called Better Caring. It's now called Mabel, and it's really large.
That's quite big. My daughter, she's a counsellor and works in that space, and she told me about that actually.
Yeah. So this was back when it was called Better Caring, and it was just a few people in a co-working space in the city.
And so that's when you joined?
That's when I joined.
Awesome.
I joined to help run the operations, and it was so small, there was no sign on the door. I couldn't work out where the interview was.
Sounds like a normal startup.
A normal startup. It was very, very early.
Early stage, just like my audience here.
Yep. But I could see that the two founders were very passionate about making it work, and they needed the kind of skills I had, strangely. When you scale up a public health program, you typically have to scale it up really quickly because there might have been a disease outbreak. I used to have to explain this to people, but since COVID, everybody understands when there's a disease outbreak, you go from nothing to large-scale systems that have to cover large populations. And so you have to scale it up really quickly. You have to scale it up typically with very limited resources, particularly if you're working in international public health. You don't have a lot of money to scale this up. And the results really matter. If you're scaling up an emergency response to an epidemic, people's lives depend on it. So the children are either sleeping under bed nets or they're not. They've either got malaria or they don't. It's a really defined outcome. And so a startup is a bit similar. You have to scale it up ideally quickly. You don't have a lot of resources to do it. And the results really matter, because if you don't end up scaling it up, the business will just go bust.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. For most startups, that doesn't involve lives being lost. So, it's less pressure. But it is, I discovered it was the same skill set, which was a pleasant surprise. So then I worked at Mabel as the chief operating officer. So taking it from the first client up to thousands of clients. And now Mabel is huge. It's, a few hundred staff. It's got tens of thousands of users. So yeah, it ended up being the largest two-sided marketplace for aged care and disability in Australia. So that was a success. But I discovered as things get bigger and more stable, I have the urge to do it again.
You're definitely suited for the startup space.
I am suited for the startup space.
Yeah.
I thrive in environments of restriction and scarce resources.
Yeah.
And when things get too comfortable, I find it's not challenging enough.
Boring.
Yeah, routine.
Yeah.
Other people would find it quite comfortable and like a normal work environment.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Because I'm the same as you. Many startup founders are the same. You know,
yeah,
we like that that constant challenge and change, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely one of those.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. And if that's the case, I'd like to ask you one thing, and that is if you could subscribe or follow my channel. This helps me out tremendously to grow my channel and in turn help early stage startup founders on their difficult journey.
So Mabel got really big. It got normal things like HR departments and finance departments and standard operating procedures. And then they were going for their ISO certification. And I thought, the baby's grown up. It doesn't need me anymore. And I'd had lots of fun. I'd been chief operating officer. I'd also been the head of data science. I got to work on all the machine learning that goes behind the Mabel platform, which was really exciting. But then I decided I thought I'd leave, and there's a great team running Mabel now, and I joined Umbo, which was basically in the same situation. It was a few people in a co-working space.
Right. Which co-working space, by?
That was in Haymarket.
Haymarket, okay.
Yeah. So, and then we quickly moved to WeWork, which is where Umbo still has its head office. But Umbo is actually mostly remote. So Umbo provides speech pathology and occupational therapy online for primarily for people in regional and rural parts of Australia where the wait lists are extremely long.
And how did you get into that? Like, was there, you know, like someone in your family that had an issue with that, or something you were passionate about that particular thing, or it was just the challenge of another startup?
I actually knew Wei, one of the founders from Cambodia. And I had posted on LinkedIn that I was leaving Mabel.
All right. Headhunted.
And then he wanted to have a chat, and I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to do another thing in the same space again.
Yeah.
But actually, after he described what the challenges were in the sector, I just thought, this thing has to work. You cannot have children on wait lists for multiple years because there's no available therapist, when all the research shows that every week of delay in a child receiving speech pathology or occupational therapy reduces their chance of achieving the same outcomes as other children. So it's simply not okay to have young children on long wait lists.
Timing's really important in the health sector, particularly. I interviewed Pia Clinton Tarasted from Clean Slate Clinic.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, somebody that needs to go in, like detox or rehab, they can do it immediately, you know, without even going in. But, you know, the way that it works and for a really reasonable price as well. And that can really make such a huge difference, you know, that sort of timing. So I guess it's the same with Umbo.
It's exactly the same. Yeah, being able to get in immediately. Also, we were very lucky that one of the co-founders of Umbo, Ed, had done a lot of research on how to deliver therapy online effectively. And there's a lot of evidence now to show that when it's done in the right way, which is not necessarily the same way as you do it face-to-face, but when it's done in the right way, it has the same clinical outcomes, or can have the same clinical outcomes. Yeah. And so there's no reason to have someone on a wait list, when they could have exactly the same outcomes immediately by using just a different delivery mechanism. So that was really inspiring. So I said, yes, sure, I'll join Umbo.
So what was your role there?
So I was head of data technology and growth. And the growth part obviously needed to be done first because they were very small and needed to rapidly scale up their client base in order to be financially viable, and we needed to get some investment on board.
So tell us about that, because these are the hardest things to do as early stage startup founder. So tell us about that story, how you did it, problems that you overcame, you know, so others can learn from that.
Absolutely. So the most important, well, not necessarily always the most important thing for investors, but if you're going to go for investment, it's very helpful to be able to show good unit economics. So you need to be able to show how much it's going to cost to get a client. You need to be able to show how much revenue that client is going to bring in over their lifetime, so the lifetime value of the client. And you need to be able to show that on each client or on each unit of whatever you're doing, that's why it's unit economics, that you're going to be able to make enough margin. And also that you have sources for both supply and demand. So at Umbo, what that meant was before we could raise investment, we actually had to demonstrate that we could get more clients and how much it was going to cost to get those clients and how long the clients would stay in therapy so that we could see how much revenue we would make. And we needed to demonstrate that we could also get new therapists because there's a shortage of therapists. So there's no point having all the clients if you can't get the therapists. And similarly, that we could get the therapists at a reasonable cost.
So how did you go about that?
So we went about that by testing a whole lot of different acquisition channels,
right,
which is typically what I do anytime I have this type of problem. It's, okay, well, we need to see if we can get clients. What are all the different ways we could get clients? We could get them through partnerships by calling up other providers and asking, do you have people on the wait list? Would you like to refer them? We could get them through Google Ads. We could run Facebook campaigns. We could do it through PR, you know, and you go and you list out all of the different ways you could do this and systematically test each one. Quite often when you've got a new startup, you don't have a lot of money. And so you're often a bit haphazard in doing the testing.
Yeah.
But if you sit down and you actually do it completely systematically, you will often find that there are maybe 1 or 2 channels where you can consistently get clients and you can work out how much it's going to cost you to get those clients. So in Umbo's case, actually the best way to get clients at that stage was through Google Ads.
Really?
In other sectors, that is not true at all. So for example, Zapcat, which is in assisting households to transition to clean energy, that's the one I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah.
We've consistently gone through, and although we can get clients through Google Ads, the cost of getting those clients is too high. And the conversion rate is too low and the lifetime value is too low. So the unit economics through that channel don't work, whereas it looks like PR is probably our better channel.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's totally different by business. Just because Google Ads worked for one business doesn't mean it will work for the others. And just because PR worked over here doesn't mean it's going to work over there.
And I guess going through that, you're also building up future clients. Like you're going to build up a list of people that are interested.
Yes, you're going to get a database of people that are interested. And so, you know, we went through and we tested all the different methods.
Yeah.
We identified one channel that both could deliver a consistent stream of clients, but also the cost was low enough that the lifetime value of the client could easily pay for that cost as well as paying for the therapist, and we'd have some money left over.
Yeah.
We did exactly the same on the therapist side. Now at Umbo, it's really funny. When I turned on the Google Ads, there were so many clients coming through that we were overwhelmed and I had to turn it off.
Oh, really?
And that doesn't always happen. That does not always happen.
That's what you want.
That's what you want.
Overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, this story about people in rural and remote areas not having access to therapy services and desperately needing those services, that is true. As soon as they saw the service was available, we were inundated. So I had to quickly turn it off. But then the question was, could we get therapists? And same thing, we had to test all of the acquisition channels all the way through. That took a lot longer. That was about 6 months worth of testing, running probably a test every 2 weeks or so.
Okay.
And eventually we worked out that a combination of Seek ads with LinkedIn advertising around our brand as a recruitment brand, those two run together was the most effective acquisition channel.
Interesting.
At that time, and it wasn't too expensive. And we could get a consistent stream of therapists through that way. And that's what we went to investors with. It was an actual financial model that said, we have tested all of this. We know we can get clients at this cost. We know we can get therapists at that cost. We know clients will spend this much. And here's a financial model that forecasts all of that out.
And that's really important, isn't it? Especially in the social enterprise space, it's much more difficult to get funding. And so if you really have a sort of analytical approach and show the numbers and, you know, I think that makes a big difference. So doing that work at the beginning can make a big difference instead of just going in there and saying, look, how wonderful it is. And it might be the most wonderful thing there is. But, you know, if the numbers don't stack up, then it's really hard to get people on board, I would say. And you probably know, like currently you're on the board or a founder of Syndix. So you're connecting social enterprises with loans and investments. So you'd know that very well, I guess, no?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I would say, and Syndix is very new. It's a syndicate. So it's a group of us that are interested in investing or providing loans or financing for social enterprises. And what we found is that finding people who are really passionate about what they're doing, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's probably the easier part of it, to find someone who's really passionate and has a great idea. But to then also have all of the analytical side of it, the consistent testing, the financial model, the forecast, those skills are less common in the social enterprise space. And so when of all the applications we've seen come through, it's probably that part that's needing more work, whereas the mission is fantastic. You know, everybody's on board with the passion of the founder. It comes down to, from a business perspective, can we see the testing's been done? Can we see that the unit economics make sense? Is this investment going to pay off, or is the loan going to be able to be paid back? Yeah.
It's really important. And so you're in Umbro, and then you're doing all of this research, and then you've got all the numbers, and what happens then?
Okay, so then we had an investor who was interested but wasn't wanting to commit until they could see the traction with these numbers.
Right. And that's the whole thing, the catch-22 always, isn't it? It's like, we want to see you get a whole lot of sales first, and then we'll invest. But if we get a whole lot of sales, then why do we need your investment? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And I would recommend to founders, and we're doing this with Zapcat at the moment, we will not go for investment unless we absolutely need to. And we wouldn't go for investment unless we had good unit economics to show, because if you don't have good unit economics to show, essentially your valuation is going to be really low. And so if you can get an investor on board, there's a good chance you won't be able to get an investor on board. But if you could, they take such a large cut of your company, you know, and it may not be a success. So my recommendation, if you can, and not everybody's in a position to do this, so I appreciate this is a very privileged thing to say, but if you can bootstrap it to the point of, I have good unit economics, then you've got a choice. You can either grow it yourself because you see your unit economics there, and you can grow it more slowly because you don't have a big cash injection at the start, but you could grow it and then you go, I know I'm going to be able to grow it because my unit economics are good. Or you can take that to investors and you're going to get a much better valuation, and the investors are going to be a lot more excited about putting money in. And so it'll just be a much easier conversation. But yes, by the time you've got good unit economics, there's a genuine choice there.
Yeah. I think it also comes down in some cases to timing. So with my startup, we got in very early, like one of the first in Australia, or if not the first. But then what companies that came along doing the same thing like 4 years later, you know, because we had COVID, and then after that, and you had a lot of money, a lot of investment, they just absolutely took off, whereas we were like a slow burn. And then by the time, you know, like, then we were sort of behind the game, our technology, everything, even though we spent a lot of money on it. So it can depend on everyone's circumstance. But most people do say if you can bootstrap, then it is better in most cases, no?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it maybe also depends on how important is it to capture a large amount of market share. So in Mabel's case, we did need to raise significant rounds, multiple significant rounds, because it's a two-sided marketplace. And in two-sided marketplaces, typically there's your biggest marketplace, and there's sometimes room for a second player, but there's not really room for anything after that, because a marketplace works by having most people using it.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have 10 marketplaces in Australia, at least.
No. I mean, there's big examples like Airbnb, Uber, etc. They have the huge share, and there's not much else really.
Exactly. Yeah. Like people often struggle to name the second one, and they definitely can't name the third one.
Even the search engine, Google, like I can't even remember the ones that were there before, Yahoo or whatever. Like they're insignificant now.
Exactly. So if you've got something where capturing a large amount of market share is crucial for the thing to succeed, then you have to raise money, because nobody, you know, unless you're a high net worth individual yourself, nobody is going to have the money to be able to capture enough market share to make it work. Whereas if I look at Umbo, we did a small raise at the start and we haven't raised again. And that's a deliberate choice. We could have, but we didn't need to. And it's actually a service-based business. So Umbo is perfectly capable of operating as a really effective business and a really excellent service, while there are many other, you know, allied health businesses in Australia operating at the same time. Umbo does not need to capture the entire market share in order to be effective at what it's doing. In fact, as a service, and Umbo is a social enterprise, so we take a portion of the profits and we use that to provide free services for families that can't afford it.
Okay.
that type of arrangement is actually better without many investors involved who are focused mostly on profits. You know, we have a really great investor at Umbo who's a social impact investor, and they're fully on board with the mission. But if we were to take on large amounts of investment at Umbo, you know, it would be challenging for our mission. And our mission doesn't need us to be giant. Our mission needs us to be, you know, to be a functioning social enterprise that's able to generate enough profit to provide services to people who need it.
Yeah, exactly. And like there is a bit of, you know, school of thought that the whole startup space is just looking for the unicorns, you know, and for the Ubers or the Airbnb or whatever. But there's so many others, especially in social enterprise space, that are doing a lot of good, and they're not huge, but they're working in their community and they're making a huge difference. And that they definitely need to be supported as well. But I guess a lot of the big VC firms, they're looking for the unicorns, but there's others like Lend for Good and other, you know, there needs to be a lot more in that social enterprise space that are sort of helping in that area, but there's still a huge deficit. I always bring this up, but Cameron Neal, I interviewed him from Lend for Good, and he was saying $31 billion deficit of funding for those sort of, you know, that social enterprise space in Australia alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do see a lot of social enterprises, they can see the VCs are looking for the unicorn, and so they're trying to present themselves as a tech platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
When in fact they're not. A tech platform is not the solution.
No.
Running a really excellent service utilizing all the available technology is the solution, but it's not something that VCs are necessarily interested in, which is why we do need things like Lend for Good, which is why we've got Syndics as our syndicate. It's interested in investing in this type of thing because I think it can skew people's approach when they think I've got to be the unicorn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with Syndic, so if I'm a social enterprise and I'm just getting started, and you know I've done a lot of research and the numbers add up, and I approach you, well, what happens then? Like, how do you work in that with those startups?
So because we've all been involved in social enterprises ourselves, we try and make it a really transparent process. So if you go to our website, if you go to the Syndics website, syndics.com.au, you can actually see the step-by-step process that we're going to follow. Okay. Because as a social enterprise, you often send off applications and you hear nothing back for months and you have no idea what's happened to them. So the way we do it is...
Syndics with a Y, right? SYNDICS?
Yes, that's it, SYNDICS. And, you know, you often send things off, never hear back. Yeah. But what we try and do is you come to the website, you put in an application. It takes about 30 minutes to fill out our initial form. Yep. It's quite short. We keep it quite short so that you're not wasting your time before you get some indication of whether there are people in the syndicate that are interested. Yeah. You fill out that form. We circulate it to all the members of Syndics. They basically say, yes, I'm interested in knowing more, or no, I'm not interested in knowing more. Yeah. If they say, no, I'm not interested in knowing more, one of the rules of Syndics is if you're going to be on the syndicate side, you have to give feedback. It's really essential that the social enterprise receives feedback, and it's clear that it's got to be clear to them what could they do differently, what could they change in order to get a different answer from you. Yes, yes. Because so often, again, you put things in and you don't get clear feedback back, and so you can't improve anything. Exactly, yeah. I mean, you should always be asking those questions, even if like you go for a job interview or whatever and you don't get it, you know, what could I have done better? What did I do well? I think there's really important questions. Exactly. And so we actually try to get that first round of feedback done within 14 business days. That's really it's a really quick, you spend 30 minutes filling out the form. In 14 business days, you at least get some feedback on, are there people interested or are they not, and why? And then if there are people interested, we then ask you for some more information, which would take an hour or two to complete. And again, we send it back around, 14 business days. Are people still interested or not, and why? Yeah. And then if we've still got people interested, that's when we arrange a call between the social enterprise and the lenders and investors who would be interested, so that you can meet each other and ask each other questions. Yeah. It's really important to us that it's not just anonymous names, that there's a real relationship between, you know, the social enterprise and the people who want to be providing the finance. And then after that call, if everybody's interested in going ahead, and sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't for different reasons, but again, feedback. And then we would help arrange the paperwork to make it all happen. So, but we're aiming for a really transparent, very quick process for everyone.
Right. No, it's really important. There should be, the more of this happening in the space, the better it is. Like, I'm a real advocate for all the social enterprises, doing good in all these different ways. And just going back, I mean, all this work that you're doing and like living in Malawi and Cambodia and, no electricity, like doing it really tough. Is there something in your background or your formative years that you think that has sort of made you into this person? Because, look, not many people would do that, let's face it. That's
a good question. I have often wondered that myself. My husband probably wonders that regularly.
Right. Well, tell us a bit about you growing up, and is there anything in your life that you could think of that might have made you, this caring person and trying to help so many people?
I mean, I grew up middle to upper class Sydney. I lived in Coogee, near the beach.
Yeah.
There's nothing in there that you go, yeah, she grew up in an impoverished childhood, therefore she likes these really difficult situations. One thing I will say is that my father has always worked in the non-profit space, and he's very committed to social issues and social causes. And so I probably learnt some of it from him, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have no idea, genuinely, it perplexes me.
Well, it could be innate. I mean, you're just a person that was always, have you always been like that since you were young?
Yeah, I've always been like that. I've always enjoyed things that are a challenge, but also things that help others or that contribute to the world in one way or another, whether it's people, whether it's planet. Yeah, I've always had a challenge working on things that don't have a purpose. I just seem to be unable to do it, which is not necessarily a good thing. It's
I don't know.
a limiting thing.
I'm with you on that because I've worked in some occupations where it wasn't my thing at all, and it's not good spiritually, I would say, for you. If you can do something that you're passionate about and believe in, it just makes such a difference.
Yeah, I find I would rather do something I'm passionate and believe in and not get paid than do something that to me has no purpose and get paid.
Yeah.
Really any amount of money. I can't bring myself to get up in the morning and go and do it.
Yeah. I mean, look, when it comes to money, we need money to live, and, it's nice to live well. But at the end of the day, you're not going to take any of that with you. You're just going to take all the good deeds that you've done.
Yeah. But I'm also very conscious that I am able to do that because I'm well enough off that that's an option. And I'm sure it would be extremely different, were I in a financial circumstance where I absolutely had to work and I didn't get a choice about how I worked or what I did. And there's many people, the majority of the world, lives in that circumstance.
We're very fortunate, really, like here in Australia and other developed countries. And you've seen it firsthand, and you've lived that experience. And that experience as well, like living in Malawi and in Cambodia in those conditions, how has it changed you as a person?
I do remember coming back to Australia and having reverse culture shock. Standing in the supermarket aisle looking at the toothpastes. Just being like, how do we have so much stuff here? How did this happen? How did we end up in a world that has such huge amounts of inequality? I think it certainly makes it really obvious when you're living there that the world has extreme inequality and that our lifestyles here in Australia and other developed countries are unsustainable. When you think that everybody in the world should be able to have an equal, standard of living, and we're here with 10,000 types of toothpaste in supermarkets. Like, it hit me really hard coming back. I've kind of gotten more used to it. I've been back for a long time now, so I've gotten more used to it, but I still think about it. I still think about it regularly. So I think it probably affected me in that way, and it certainly made me more appreciative. I work in the social enterprise space these days in non-critical settings. So when I fail, Zapcat's test, split test the other week, total failure, complete bomb. We've done lots of tests. We've done tons of tests. Some of them worked, lots of them didn't work. Nobody died. Yeah. It did not critically injure anyone. We didn't fail to deliver a program that was meant to save thousands of lives and then didn't. So I think it's made me much more relaxed about when you're working in a non-critical environment. So you accidentally emailed 10,000 people the wrong thing. It's funny. Just send an apology.
Yeah. It's funny because there's some event on tomorrow and I got an email today saying, hey, we see you didn't turn up. But then it was a text, another one came saying, hey, sorry about the text we just sent. And then another one came, the same thing, hey, sorry. Who's controlling this?
And you think about the poor marketing coordinator who's probably totally stressed out about the fact that but then you also think, hey, these people are really going to know about the event now.
Yeah, maybe it's a strategy. You never know.
So I think it's made me very relaxed about trying and failing when it's a non-critical environment.
And talking about failures, I mean, obviously my podcast is the Fail Wisdom podcast. So tell us about some personal failures that you've had, how you overcome them, and the lessons learned from that.
I guess, I divide my career into the time I was working on mission critical things and the time now where I'm not, essentially. And the failures and the types of failures and the impact of the failures in those two different parts are really different. So, as I was saying, we've done tons and tons and tons of tests on Zapcat. Some of them have worked, some of them have completely bombed. And, you can learn a lot from different types of tests. One test we did just recently was on hot water heat pumps. And we were able to get a whole lot of people who were really interested in hot water heat pumps. And they came through and they got their estimates, their instant estimates. And we're like, yes, this is great. This is great. People are wanting this. And then not a single one converted.
All right.
Not only did not a single one convert, but the installer that we were working with was totally fed up chasing them all.
All right.
And then didn't want to go ahead with it. So what did we learn from that? We learned a few important things. We learned that people do a lot of research about this stuff online without necessarily being ready to go ahead. We learned that we actually need to have an instant quote rather than an instant estimate, because if there was an instant automated quote, the installer would not have had to have followed these people up. In fact, it would save them tons of time. We learned that some of these people came through our website and then also came through multiple other websites at the same time. So the installer had received these leads like 4 times. And that frustrates them, understandably.
Of course,
But also that the customers may not have realized that all of these things were actually going back to the same installer. And so it helped us identify additional problems that we could solve where we could add value.
Is this the company you're currently working on?
Yes. Zapcat's the one I'm currently working on. Okay,
and just tell us briefly about that. So it's to do with the... just tell us about that.
It's helping households transition to clean energy. So your typical Australian household could save $4,500 a year in energy bills if they converted all their gas to electricity, got an EV, and then ran everything off solar. But despite the fact that it economically makes a lot of sense for households to do this, many people don't get around to doing it because it's a bit of a pain. It's faff, it's hard to do. There's also upfront costs. And you've got to make a bit of a plan for how to do it. And it's something that's really easy to put off, particularly if you're busy. If you're a busy working professional with kids, you just don't have time to be researching types of heat pumps or EV chargers or solar panels. So our objective is, we're a social enterprise. Our objective is to make it as easy as ordering Uber Eats. That's what we want to do. But as you can see, we are still working on that. It is a work in progress.
But that's a good example. Like those photos you had, you learned from them, and now your processes are a lot better. So
exactly, and we've identified a whole area of automating the quoting process that we feel could really add a lot of value to the installers and also add value to the clients, because they get an instant quote. They don't have to wait for someone to call them back. They don't have to arrange an inspection. It's just more convenient. So you got to fail sometimes rather spectacularly,
Yeah.
in order to identify what value you're adding to the world.
Exactly. Now, just reversing a bit and going back to those mission critical things that you're working on, tell us a bit more about that. So what were you actually doing, say in Malawi, for example? Like,
So
when you say mission critical, what were you doing and what was happening there? Tell us that story.
So in Malawi, I was managing a child health program. So Malawi has a really high child mortality rate, particularly for children under 5 years old. Significant numbers of children die from things like malaria, pneumonia, diarrhea. You know, the basic prevention, we know how to prevent all of these things.
Yeah.
They are entirely preventable deaths. And so it was working with the local health system and our team to implement and get communities to implement the types of prevention measures that would be needed. So, for example, making sure that all children are sleeping under bed nets to prevent mosquito bites, which reduces the malaria rate, that if they get a fever, they receive appropriate treatment within a certain amount of time, that latrines are built so that you can reduce the diarrhea rate by making sure that you've got proper hygiene and sanitation, that type of thing. And the program had been running for quite a while, but it wasn't evidence-based because they hadn't had anyone there who had public health experience. I have a PhD in public health, so it was about redesigning the program to make sure that it was using the best evidence-based practices and then measuring the change over time because they hadn't done that before. And training the Malawian team on how to run the program and keep it running in the long term. That bit at the end I added myself because it seemed ridiculous to me that this program should be run by an expat who doesn't understand the local culture. And when there are really excellent Malawian staff there. So, and the program had been managed by an expat for a really long period of time, but it was very, very important to me that the next person I handed over to was a Malawian staff member. Yeah,
it makes total sense, doesn't it? So the program can continue like that. So, wow, that's amazing. Now, you were a finalist in the B&T 2021 Women Leading Tech Awards. Now, women in tech, let's just say there's less women in tech than men.
Yes.
So, what are your thoughts on that, like women in tech, and what's been your experience being a woman working in the tech area?
There's less women in tech. I can tell you from ZapCat, there's even less women installing solar panels. So I would say at the moment, I'm definitely the odd one out at a lot of the climate tech events. But women in tech in general, so I was nominated for that award when I was the head of data science at Mabel, and I was running the data science team there, which is one of the larger data science teams at a company in Australia. They do use a lot of data in really excellent ways. And I am very passionate about women being involved in technology in areas that have typically involved men. I have all the usual stories of, I'm the head of data science and I go to interview a male candidate and he speaks only to my male colleague who he believes is the person making the decision.
Yeah.
That's very typical.
That is.
Very, very typical. So I have all of those stories. But in terms of what to actually do about it and how do you get more women involved, that I think is a more challenging thing. And I do think it needs to start really early. When I went through school, I was the only person in my entire year that did software design and development for the HSC.
Right.
There was no class. I did it myself.
Oh, really? And how did you feel about that? Like, that was just your passion, was it? And was it an issue for you that you were the only girl doing that?
I was in an all-girls school, so I actually think it was probably better that it was only me rather than me and 50 boys. If it had been me and 50 boys, I would have felt like I was out of place, that I shouldn't be there. Whereas when it's just me, it just felt like it was a less popular subject, I just did the thing that was less popular.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it makes sense.
And so to me, I feel like it needs to start much earlier. It's too late by the time people are in the workforce and have chosen their paths. You've actually got to start much, much earlier at school and university and making sure that girls are ending up in those professions. But equally, I would say we don't have enough men ending up in professions like speech pathology and occupational therapy, you know, or support work or caring roles or childcare or teaching. So it actually goes both ways. Yes, we need more women in tech, but we actually had a huge celebration at UMBO when we hired our first male therapist.
Oh, right.
It was a really big deal. We had tried so hard to get someone because 95% of the industry is female. And you looked at our team page and it was just women all the way down.
Right.
So, you know, I think early on we can do a much better job in schools getting both boys and girls to try things that are less stereotypically their gender.
Yeah. But I think it's important, and also not just to have a lot of females doing something because, you know, we think that it's more even like that. I think it has to be roles that people enjoy. Like you enjoyed it, right? So it's great you had the opportunity to do that. And, you know, we don't want all men to be therapists if it's not something that they're passionate about. But there's probably more men out there that aren't doing that because I think it's a woman's occupation, I guess, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't realize that it's actually a really interesting clinical occupation. Like it's a fascinating area.
What sort of training do you need for that?
So you're typically going to need to do a university degree in one of those two fields and then do practical placements. But from a clinical point of view, it's fascinating, and there's a lot of really interesting research to be done in that area. It makes a really direct impact on people's lives. But I agree. It needs to be things that people enjoy, but maybe just broadening people's idea of what could be enjoyable is what's needed. So they maybe give it a try when they hadn't thought about it before. But it's a challenging area, and I do love mentoring, though. I always love mentoring women, women in tech, and I've had the privilege to mentor a few over the years. So
that's great.
That's always good. But that is coming in later. That's coming in, you know, after. I've stolen a few. That was fun. I found them in other departments and then I convinced them to give it a try and then I stole them.
Oh, nice. Actually, it's funny. In the early days of my startup, we had developers and we had some interns as well. And there was one female developer. She was like 20 or something, studying at Macquarie Uni. And you know, there wasn't many others. They were mainly guys. So maybe like altogether with the interns and the three that we had, maybe 6 or 7 and one female. And then we did some marketing thing where we went somewhere and we did a promotion. And then the person that was helping us out with marketing said, look, no, I think her name was Elise, get Elise, she has to be at the front, you know, it's a big deal, women in tech. And then, you know, so she was the star of that day and she didn't even really, you know, she wasn't even that interested in that, but it was like, no, you have to put her at the front. And I'm like, oh, okay.
It does help. It helps for people to see that it's possible.
Yeah.
Which is where, you know, taking someone from another department who has an interest and training them up so that people can see that it is actually possible to transition in as well. It's good. That type of thing, it does make a difference for women to see other women, and hopefully, you know, if men can see some male therapists as well, that makes a difference.
Yep. Contact Piroska if you're a male therapist there. Got some work for you. Awesome. Oh, so what's next for you?
Oh, too many things. This is always my problem. There are too many interesting things to work on. At the moment, I'm mostly focused on ZapCat and getting that up and running and getting us through enough tests that we actually hit on enough things that work, that we get our good unit economics. But that's a long process. You know, it's going to take us probably a year or two at least to go through and test everything and get our acquisition channels and our models and things sorted. And then I'm still working with UMBO, helping UMBO to grow. I sit on the UMBO board and working with syndics, just, you know, getting applications through and working with the syndicate members. And then I also do a little bit of work with Youngster.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I interviewed Tony Rothacker, Youngster.co. So you're an advisor with them?
Yeah, I'm an advisor. I'm also a shareholder. So one of my rules in life that I finally reached this point, and I couldn't do it previously, but I'm very happy at the moment that I actually only need to work on things that I own part of. Because for me, as I'd mentioned when we were chatting earlier, a lot of people ask me to give advice and do consulting work. And I find unless I'm actually in the business and doing something on it, unless I have skin in the game, basically, it's really easy to not give advice that works, because you're just too far removed and you can't really understand what's going on in a business unless you get in there and actually do things. And so for me, it's important that if I'm going to work on something, I've got to have skin in the game. If it's going to work, it's going to work, and we're all going to win. And if it's going to bomb, it's going to bomb, and I'm going to be impacted like everybody else. And I find it really focuses you, and it makes sure that you're putting your maximum effort into making sure that your advice is the right advice, but not that you're not just giving advice. Like, I actually do practical things for Umbo. It's not all talk. It's, writing things, preparing things, finding things, finding deals, the whole range of what can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were also chatting before the podcast about, how we think helping founders is one of the best ways to learn, to grow, to relate as well. And I was telling you about a little plug here, the founders groups that I'm setting up, my failwisdom.com website. So, it's getting founders together to, advise or not advise, just talk about, they're in the same space, the same things happening. And because I found that, and many other people I've interviewed as well, so that, founders, talking to other founders is the best way to learn and to grow. So I'm setting up those groups on my website. So there's one question that I haven't asked for a while. It's a funny one, but what's a question that no one's ever asked you, but you wish they had of?
Oh, so I would say a question that I wish people would ask me is, what are you bad at? Because I've been very lucky, right? I have had a number of successful things that I've been involved in. And sometimes people interpret that as, oh, she's so great, she's got all these skills, it must have been because of her. And it's really not. Like, there's a lot of luck involved. There's entire other teams that you haven't seen involved. And occasionally people can end up with the view that, I'm able to do all of these things and I must not be bad at things. I'm bad at so many things. So many things. As I said at the start, lab work, 1. I'm actually really not good at all at being the charismatic founder. So when I look for things to work on, I find there's always 3 skill sets you need. You need a charismatic founder who's happy to be out there and talking to people and in the media and on podcasts like this, stuff like that.
Oh, come on, you've done a TED talk, and
I've done a few things,
out there,
but I'm not particularly good at being out there.
I thought it was a fantastic TED talk, by the way.
So there's a funny story about that TED talk.
Okay.
There was Cambodian secret police involved. Anyway, yes, it was an interesting day. But you need a charismatic founder. You need a technical specialist who's really passionate about the product and the quality of the product. And you need an operator. And an operator who is really good at running the business and making sure it's financially viable and making sure it can scale and its systems and processes are there. I'm a great operator.
Okay.
I am not a good charismatic founder. And unless we're talking about public health programs in developing countries, I am not a technical specialist.
Right.
And so what has made the things I've been involved with work, and what will probably make them not work in the future if I didn't follow my own advice, is I look for things where there's already a charismatic founder who's really good, where there's already a technical specialist who knows their stuff and is very passionate, and I'm able to just add the operator component.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you have to get that right combination, don't you, for things to work?
Exactly. And so it is not all about me at all. I just added one little piece in when the rest of it was already there. And so, I think for anyone listening to this, I think it's really important that it's always a team effort. And, even if you see someone like me who's been lucky enough to land in exactly the right shaped hole, multiple times over, it doesn't mean lightning gets to strike again.
No. But then again, you've put in the work, you've done the degrees, you've gone to Africa, you've gone to Cambodia, you've lived it, you lived tough, you know, you've put in the work. So
yeah,
it's not
yeah,
like
absolutely.
it's just luck. It's
No.
you've put in the work and things have come together.
Yeah. It's not just luck. You've got to put in the work, have a good bit of luck, and also fall in with exactly the right team who bring all the other skills together.
Yeah.
I have seen cases where someone's had lightning strike once, and then they go for their second round, and for the second startup, and VCs are just falling over themselves to throw money at the person who's had lightning strike once.
Yeah.
And I just don't see it that way at all. There are so many factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting what you say. Now, you can't say the secret police were involved with that TED Talk without telling us what happened there. What's the story behind that?
Oh, so this was one of the early TEDx Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh is the capital of Cambodia, where we were living. And I was one of the speakers. My husband was involved in organizing it. And at the very end of the series of TEDx presentations, there was going to be a presentation from a land rights group because the government was illegally clearing land for developments. And there were Cambodian land rights activists that wanted to do a presentation, a TEDx presentation. And halfway through TEDx, the Cambodian secret police were in the audience, and they said, if you do not cut the last presentation, we will shut down this event. We will cut the electricity. We will close it all off. And that will be the end of it. And it's a really difficult position, being in that type of position, because most likely they're not going to do anything serious to foreigners. That is not true for the Cambodian participants. And so although you might like to continue as a protest, the reality is it's actually just too dangerous for the Cambodian participants. And so the organisers decided to cut the last presentation because the government was not happy with it and didn't want it to go ahead. And we really couldn't put people at risk. That wasn't fair. Even though we, with our embassies and, foreign connections probably would have been all right. So it's a really difficult situation in Cambodia. It has gotten worse since we were there, unfortunately, the political situation. But that's what happened. So the rest of it went ahead, but unfortunately the Cambodian land rights activists weren't able to do their presentation, which was very, very unfortunate.
It is, yeah. It just makes you feel, how lucky we are in some countries that haven't got those sort of issues, political.
Absolutely. It made me realise when I came back to Australia that it is important to be involved in democracy because it is fragile and it doesn't stick around if people don't invest time and effort into it.
Yeah. And more so now than ever, I think, around the world. But that's another story. I don't really get into politics, but
no.
Yeah, interesting story. But, all right. Well, look, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. It's been wonderful having you on the podcast, and lots of knowledge for early stage startup founders from your own experience, and really admire what you're doing in the social enterprise space in so many different areas. It's quite amazing, really.
Fantastic. It was wonderful to be here.